back. This was trading near 5,000. It went to 875 or so before this bounce back. Usually you'll get a check back. So my line in the sand for me would be this little pivot right down here. You can see it's a two kind of pivot top right there and right there. And that would be your spot where if you flushed into it around 1260, 1250, that would be where a short-term long could be initiated. Yeah, so Ethereum is one of the trickier charts for me to analyze, mainly because of the curveball of the merge and how that affects price. I'm a true believer that the reason Ethereum has rallied, I mean, if you look at the rally, it was up over 100% off of the lows. My guess is a chunk of that gain was due to the excitement of the merge. My fear is that it's going to be a sell the news event. It's going to happen. Yes, it's a good thing for Ethereum, but I don't necessarily know if it's a short-term continued catalyst. So my guess is I think you could get some bounces here, but I wouldn't be surprised if you have to go at least retest 1250 down here, which would be major support before it has a chance to kind of withstand the selling pressure that the U.S. markets are likely to exude. So I'm in that camp where I still think there's a little bit more downside. I still think Bitcoin has further downside, and therefore by default probably Ethereum. The question for me is, has Ethereum put in its longer term low already? Which again, I'm a little bit murky on. Yeah, so for me, I have to wait. Anytime something rallies as much as the Ethereum chart has rallied, I would be too scared or too nervous to jump in at this minor of a pullback. I mean, we're basically down, 30% or so off of those highs maybe, but it's not a huge correction. Usually what you'll see is after you have such a big bear market drop in Ethereum, and again, if we go back, this was trading near 5,000. It went to 875 or so before this bounce back. Usually you'll get a check back. So my line in the sand for me would be this little pivot right down here. You can see it's a two kind of pivot top right there and right there. And that would be your spot where if you flushed into it around 1260, 1250, that would be where a short-term long could be initiated for a bounce, a pretty significant bounce back up. Yeah, and that's part of it too, is we have to respect the risk side of the stock market and its impact on the crypto market, right? So I do think that earnings estimates have to come down more. Everything I'm seeing right now, they haven't come down very much at this point. So if I'm right that the economy is going to start to show more and more weakness, then those stocks are going to have to adjust down to kind of keep their status with their PE ratios. And I think that's going to be the kicker here, where if you see another 10, 20, 30% downside on the NASDAQ, maybe 20% on the S&P, then by default, it will drag down cryptocurrencies. But I'll tell you one thing that I'm looking for, and it's no one's really talking about it, but I'm curious for cryptocurrencies, and this could be a big bullish catalyst, is that do we get the Gary Genslers, the SEC, do we get some form of clarity on what kind of restrictions or what kind of rules Ethereum and the altcoins are going to have as securities? And I know everyone's like, oh my goodness, this is going to be horrible for them. But interestingly enough, clarity is what the market craves. And when you get clarity, even if it's bad initially, I believe the market will actually embrace it after an initial sell-off. So you might see it panic, right? You might see that big dip down. It's almost worth kind of throwing out some orders at ridiculously low levels, because if we get that, it sells hard, and then all of a sudden people say, wait a minute, now we know what this means. We know it. So now we can value these things. And I think, again, that could be a bottom in the crypto market. Yeah, so I think initially the panic, right? It's kind of like a rising tide lifts all boats, or the opposite occurs when you see panic, people, and we saw this, by the way, in the COVID March 2020 collapse. Gold collapsed, Bitcoin collapsed, the stock, people were so panicked that everything kind of fell. So I think initially you would see that, and then very quickly that would be a buying opportunity for something like a Bitcoin. So I would just look at it as like, if you have the view like I do that long-term Bitcoin is amazing, then I do think you use it as a buying opportunity. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that I know we're kind of dealing with, is there going to be regulation? What type of regulation? Is it going to be bad regulation? I would like to make the point that I hear a lot more of the politicians getting involved with Bitcoin and buying it as an investment. And this is what's crazy, is they're involved with the dollar and what's going on in the spending in the government, and therefore they almost know deep down that the dollar's long-term in trouble, and they're diversifying with Bitcoin. So they're not gonna, they actually want Bitcoin to survive and thrive when they have investments in it. So I'm all for it. Like I think they'll be fine. I think the Bitcoin regulation or overall will be fine. No, I do think this is probably, and again, you know, the next couple weeks, part of that, by the way, is the same thing with the stock market, is that August and early September, the volume is very, very light in the stock market, in crypto. So you get a lot of these kind of crazy moves. So that's why I'm kind of questioning, is this drop we're seeing right now the beginning, or is it going to come in a couple weeks or a month from now? But I do think that ultimately within a month and a half to 2 months, we are fully in that next leg lower in crypto as a whole. And I do think, for me at least, I still have that 12,000, 13,000 price target, which happens to be a what I call a measured move, taking the initial move from 69 down to 32-ish, and then the bounce high from 48 measured out to equal that first drop would take us to about 12. Yeah, I do think that Ethereum has a little bit more downside to go, probably to around that 1250 level, according to the charts. Basically, you just have to see a little bit of a washout. In fact, the last 3 days, you could even argue that we're starting to see a little bear flag forming, which dictates a slight negative bias there. So my guess is, if you're going to get a big bounce, you want to see that retrace. And in fact, I haven't done a Fibonacci retrace on it, but in fact, I can show my chart here and we can do it. So now let's just see what we got here. So if we take this low here and we go up to the high, basically you're looking at about a little bit more than a 618 Fibonacci retrace to get back down to 1200 and change on that. So right in that lower range, I would say. That's a good question. Put it to you this way, I feel more comfortable being in Bitcoin right now. So if you had a portfolio and you just said, okay, of this 100,000, how much do you put in Bitcoin? How much do you put in Ethereum? Assuming you had to be fully invested, I would probably do 65% Bitcoin, 35% Ethereum, mainly because, again, you have to look at the risks, and there's more risks. I mean, we know that Gensler basically says Bitcoin's a commodity. We know that. It's Ethereum that we have to figure out how that's going to all play out. And that is an added risk. So you have to kind of factor that into your allocation in your portfolio. And just to be clear, like in terms of long term, I love Ethereum. I love Bitcoin. I'm not sold on any other cryptos yet because I think there's too much jockeying for those next few slots. And I think you have to be careful about that. I mean, we could see Solana emerge as a leader. We could see Avalanche. We could see any of these, but there's no guarantees. And if you look a year ago at what was in the top 10 or the top 15, a lot of those are no longer there, and that has to be factored in as well. But you know what's always been number one and number two? Ethereum and Bitcoin, right? So I think you just want to be careful about that as investors. Let me just comment on that. So keep in mind, folks, that Ethereum has already run up significantly, probably a large portion to the merge, right? Obviously, the bounce in crypto was a part of that, but I never like to be in the crowd. So if you said you have to buy one thing right now, I would absolutely go with Bitcoin because it hasn't percentage-wise gone up as much. I don't want to be, I hate being in the last portion of people that get into an asset. I always want to be first. I like being first.